So today we are here to talk about the launch of my, I was going to say new book, but it is new, but also it's my first book. Probably the only one I'm writing because fuck me, it took me a long time. But here it is, in my real life hands. Look, how cool is that? You can go on to cyberscaperoom.co/attention-please to download a free copy on PDF, or you can buy a version of it with your very own British pounds from there as well. And I will send you a very nice personalised note because I'm lovely like that. But I'm not going to sit and talk through kind of everything that's in the book today. What I want to do is give you guys a little bit of insight as to our methodology, kind of the philosophy that sits behind a lot of the things that we do, because I think it's actually really interesting from a kind of behavioural psychology kind of perspective. And I think it's quite useful for stuff that you guys can kind of take back into your organisation and hopefully put to good use. So, without further ado, let me, for the second time today, start this bloody slideshow because, here we go. Cool, hopefully everyone can see that, fingers crossed. Right, so human risk is not a people problem. Sounds like a little bit of a contradiction, but we're going to get into it and hopefully it will all make sense at the end. But firstly, as you might not all know who the fuck I am, I will give you a bit of a rundown. So, my name's Amy. I run a company called the Escape Room Company. Hopefully you guys know that by now. We do cool things like building immersive cybersecurity training. We run escape rooms, we have digital escape rooms, we have a phishing platform so you can practice talking to someone who might be nefarious and you can practice saying no to them. We do big live events. We've also got a nice tabletop platform that's coming out at the end of this month. And I'm sure if you want to talk to us about that, Mike or James would love to have that conversation. I have spent the last 5 years watching people learn things the hard way. Now, that is because I've made them do things the hard way. In rooms full of puzzles and pressure and swearing, usually, mostly from me, but yes, swearing as well. I sometimes run a podcast called Unicorn Chef. I sometimes run a conference called Oh For Fuck's Sake. And as you all know, I have written a book all about all of this. And it's called May I Have Your Attention Please? And it is, yes, 150 pages-ish of me arguing that everything the training industry does is wrong, backed up by a frankly unreasonable amount of neuroscience. But yes, I'm not here to sell you anything today other than my lovely book, but you can get that for free. I am here to make you a little bit uncomfortable and then hopefully give you guys something useful that you can use. Now, this is a weird bit of the talk for me because I can't actually see any of you. So hopefully you're going to put your hands up when I say hands up if you have ever driven over the speed limit because you were running late. I'm going to assume everyone has their hands up because all of us do that. But here's the question. When you were doing 85 on the motorway because you had a meeting at 9 and left the house at 10 to, did you know that that was dangerous? I'm going to assume that you did also know that it was dangerous. You knew what the speed limit was, you knew what the risks were, you probably sat through a theory test at some point that told you exactly what happens at a high speed impact. If you're anything like me, you've got more than one speeding ticket and maybe done more than one speed awareness course where they've reiterated the speed limit to you and the importance of driving at the proper speed. You've got all of the awareness in the world about the speed, and yet you still put your foot down anyway. And why is that? It's because the context makes it feel justified. Because you're late, because everyone else is doing it, because the road was empty, because there's no coppers around to tell me off, because driving fast sometimes feels fun. All of those things feed into why you were speeding. So it's not that an awareness failure, it's not an awareness failure because you all know what the speed limit is. It's a behaviour that you've chosen because the moment overrode what you knew. So I want you to hold that thought now. When I tell you that Proofpoint surveyed 7,500 adults across 15 different countries, 71% of those people admitted to taking risky actions at work. the other 29% were probably lying, right? And of those 71%, 96% of those people knew that the action was dangerous when they were doing it. 96%. They didn't need more training. They didn't need a longer module. They didn't need a poster in the kitchen with a picture of a padlock on it, right? They knew. They knew what they were doing. They knew it was risky, and they did it anyway. Sound familiar? Yes. So this is not a cybersecurity problem that we've got. It's actually a human behaviour problem. And we're never, ever going to solve that with a slide deck and a quiz, which is what 99% of our current training actually looks like. So, in 2025, the University of San Diego and the University of Chicago ran the most rigorous study that's ever been done on mandatory annual cybersecurity training. It was a randomised study, it was a controlled study, there were 19,500 employees across multiple organisations. It is proper peer-reviewed science, which was presented at Black Hat. And that showed that the difference in phishing susceptibility between the trained group and the untrained group, i.e. one group did no training at all, one group did annual mandatory training, the difference between the ability to spot phishing was a whopping 1.7%. That is what annual training is buying you, a 1.7% difference. So let me put this a little bit differently. Imagine that you guys go and see a comedian and you're in a room full of people and nobody in the audience laughs, not once. Not at all for the entire show. Whose fault is that? Is that the audience's fault for not finding it funny? Or is it the comedian's fault for not being funny? Now, I would say obviously that's the comedian's fault. No one is going to blame 500 people for not laughing at bad jokes. But when annual training doesn't change behaviour, what does the industry do? We blame the people. They're not taking security seriously. They keep clicking. They don't care. Maybe, just maybe, they are not the problem. Maybe it's the training that's the problem. And just like the comedian, the delivery is so fundamentally wrong that no audience on earth could respond to it in the way that you're hoping. So, another stat. In March this year, the US Army looked at their own data and reduced their mandatory cyber training from annual to once every 5 years. That's the US military deciding annual training is a waste of time. So, 61% of employees fail a basic 7-question security quiz after completing training. Not a difficult exam, 7 questions, and more than half of people can't pass it after they've completed the training. A 2024 survey by Hornet Security found that 38% of people just forgot the content entirely within days. And 31% described the training as unengaging. And honestly, 31% feels low. I think the other 69% just maybe didn't want to be rude. They were probably British, there we go. And here's a bit that should really bother everyone. So Verizon's 2025 data shows that 80% of incidents are caused by 8% of employees. 8%. But the problem that we've got is annual training treats every single person exactly the same. So they have the same module, the same quiz, the same certificate. It does not do anything to identify or address any high-risk individuals with any level of specificity. It is what I'm calling the bluntest possible instrument applied to the most concentrated possible problem. And our industry loves to talk about people, process and technology. We say it in every single board paper, every strategy deck, people, process, technology, the holy fucking trinity of cyber, right? But then we'll look at what we actually regulate for. So we've got ISO 27001 is the world's most widely adopted information security standard. It has 93 controls. 37 of those controls are organisational, lovely. 34 of them are technological, great. 14 are physical, and how many address people? Do we know? Anyone? It's 8. 8 out of 93. That's less than 9%. So we live in a world where 60% of breaches involve a human element, but less than 9% of the controls in our flagship standard address it. So we talk about people, process and technology, but we're only regulating for process and technology. And then we wonder why the people bit isn't working, right? So what we found out is the biggest study that's ever been done on annual training found it doesn't work, and the US Army agrees with that. Most people can't pass a basic quiz after finishing that training. 96% of people who take risky actions already know that they're risky, and the regulatory framework that we all follow barely addresses the human element at all. We do not have an awareness problem. We have a behaviour problem, and you cannot solve a behaviour problem by giving people more information. So the question is, why doesn't the information stick? And the answer, luckily, isn't that complicated. It's biological. So, I'm going to ask you another quick question. Again, really fucking weird doing this because I can't actually see anyone. But anyway, we'll go with it. Who remembers what they had for lunch last Tuesday? Nobody, right? I think Prince Andrew is probably the only person on earth who can remember exactly what he had for lunch on a specific day, and it was a margarita pizza at Pizza Express in Woking, in case anyone was wondering. But seriously, you ate lunch last Tuesday. You chose it. You probably went to the shop for it, right? You bought it, you chose it, you ate it, you tasted it, and then a couple of days later, or a week later, or whatever, that information is gone out of your head, right? Lunch is something that you enjoy. I look forward to lunch every day. I don't fucking know what I had for lunch yesterday. So imagine how your brain is treating a 40-minute compliance module about password hygiene when you can't even remember things that you like, right? So, let's look at a bit of the science behind it. Herman Ebbinghaus mapped the forgetting curve in the 1880s. So what he did was he taught himself a load of nonsense syllables, and then he mapped how long it took for him to forget those syllables. That study was replicated in 2015, and the information does still hold. So this is what the forgetting curve actually looks like. Within 20 minutes of learning something new, you've already lost 40% of it. Within an hour, more than half of that's gone. And at the end of the day, you're down to about a third. Within a week, you're retaining maybe 10 to 15% of what you actually took in the first place. That's not a slow fade, is it? That is a cliff edge with a bit of a gentle slope at the bottom. And that is the biological baseline that we're all working with. That's what every single brain does with information that it considers to be low stakes, emotionally flat, and completely disconnected from real experience, which, let's be honest, describes around 99% of all compliance training that's ever been made. Standard cybersecurity training makes absolutely zero effort to address any of this. We have content that's delivered once annually, usually, at a point that's completely disconnected from the moments when the knowledge actually needs to surface. So the audit trail records a completion. The brain records absolutely jack shit. So let me tell you a bit of a story to make this a little bit more relatable. This story, I think, is actually in the book. No, it is in the book. I don't think. I do know that. My daughter is 8 years old. Every week she does a spelling test at school. So every Tuesday a new list arrives and she practices those words every evening. By the time the test comes around, she walks into class and she absolutely nails it. She gets 9 or 10 out of 10 every week. Gold star. She's happy, I'm happy, we all move on. Until we get to the end of term. And that is when the teacher runs a consolidation test using all of the spellings from the past few weeks. And suddenly, those perfect scores start to wobble a little bit, and that 9 out of 10 becomes a 4, maybe. But how is that possible? Because she knew those spellings and she passed the test and she even got the Lego to prove it. Well, the reason that those test scores decline is because she didn't learn that information for very long. She learned the spellings for a very specific purpose with a very specific window of time. So long enough to pass the test, long enough to tick the box, long enough to con me out of a prize for getting top marks. As soon as that moment passed, the information then stopped being useful to her brain. And the brain, sadly, is ruthless with information that it doesn't need anymore. It clears the space out, it gets rid of it, right? The exact same thing is happening with corporate training every single day. So someone completes the module, passes the quiz, closes the tab, If you're like me, goes and gets a biscuit to reward yourself for being the best person ever at spotting phishing emails, and then 3 weeks later, they remember absolutely none of it, because the brain has filed it under short-term, single use, no longer required. Thank you very much. So what does the brain actually respond to? Good question. Rodiger and Karpik at Washington University actually tested this. So they took 2 groups and gave them the same information. Now, one group restudied the material, so they did what I would call traditional revision, read it, revised it, whatever. The other group was tested on it. So instead of them getting to reread the information, they were just asked questions about it, and they were forced to pull that information back out of their memory. Now that is what we call in neuroscience active retrieval. 2 days later, they did a bit of a test, and the restudy group had forgotten 56% of the information. The retrieval group had only forgotten 13% of it. So they had the same information given to them and completely different outcomes, because the brain doesn't store things through exposure. It stores things through use. So through recalling, deciding, acting. And that's what my daughter's consolidation test was actually measuring. It wasn't measuring whether she'd seen the words, it was measuring whether she could retrieve those words once that original context was gone. Now, every single decision that you make in an immersive scenario is a retrieval loop. You're not being told what phishing looks like, you're actually doing it in an inbox under pressure, you're making a decision about it. That is exactly how memory forms. Not through slides, sadly, but through rehearsal. And the timing of training matters enormously as well. So Carnegie Mellon's Scilab found that training delivered at the exact point of error, i.e. the moment someone actually makes the mistake, reduces susceptibility by up to 40%, which is quite a nice large number. I call this the toddler principle. So if you think about it like a toddler, if your 2-year-old has their hand in the biscuit tin, you need to tell them no right there and then, in that moment, while their hand is still in the biscuit tin. Because if you wait 10 minutes and then try to explain why biscuits before dinner are a bad idea, they've forgotten about it. They've totally moved on, and they're probably trying to put the cat in the washing machine at this point. Right, so the moment's gone, and adults are the same. Possibly not quite as interested in biscuits, but the principle is identical. So learning that lands at the moment of the decision creates a completely different kind of memory than learning that's delivered 6 months before the decision happens. Which is why, with all of the escape rooms that we have, the feedback loop is immediate. So if you've got the wrong answer, you're not opening the padlock. If you've got the right answer, brilliant, it's opened. Now here is where some of this gets slightly counterintuitive and also really, really fucking annoying. So, Harvard researchers gave 2 matched groups the same material. So they had the same content, the same information. One group got it through a traditional lecture, so, pale stale male stood at the front telling you all what to do. The other group got active learning. Now, on a test after the learning was done, the active learning group scored 70%. Brilliant. The lecture group scored 45%. So far, so straightforward. But this is the bit that should make you all think, what the fuck? The lecture group reported feeling that they'd learnt more. So they were more confident in what they'd learnt because they'd had a lecture rather than the active learning group. So the group that performed worse felt more confident, and the group that actually learnt more felt less confident during the whole process. And that is a perception gap, and that's what's running your training program right now. So every time someone sits through a module, ticks complete, and then walks away feeling super informed, they're actually experiencing the illusion of learning. They're not actually learning. They just think they are. Like who sat through an online training module and had another tab open at the same time? Everyone, right? But that still counted as complete, and it still showed up on someone's dashboard as evidence that training is working. That little green tick, that is one of the most expensive lies in cybersecurity. A quick aside for some of the nerds that might be watching this. Some of you will have seen what is called the learning pyramid. That is one that says you retain 10% of what you read and 90% of what you do. Makes a nice little graphic for people who do training, but it's very shareable. But it's also complete bollocks. Those numbers actually have no data behind it, so we don't cite it. The real data is a lot better, and I'm giving you plenty of it. I am going to give you one more statistic, and I'm going to stop beating everyone up about this stuff. Jorgensen he did some research and estimated that around 10% of training expenditure actually results in transfer to on-the-job behaviour. 10%. So what that says is we're spending billions of pounds globally on a system that's got a 10% transfer rate. And when it doesn't work, what do? We blame our people. They're not taking security seriously. They keep clicking. But no, that's not true, is it? Because it's the design that's the problem. The industry has been designing training for the brains that it wishes people had, which are sadly rational, consistent and obedient. But we know that people are emotional, contextual, very fucking distractible, and that people lean on their instinct a lot more than they lean on instruction. So to paraphrase the wonderful James Clear from Atomic Habits, people do not rise to the level of their training, they fall to the level of their habits. And habits are not built in a compliance module. So to summarise that little bit, the brain forgets half of what it hears within an hour. People who sit through lectures feel more confident but score worse, and training delivered once a year misses the moment entirely, and only 10% of that actually transfers to real behaviour anyway. So it's not a people problem, it's a design problem. So the question becomes, what do we design for instead? Well, luckily I'm here to tell you. We train for instinct. So if we think about how we learn things that actually stick with us. When you learn to swim, hopefully you've all learned to swim, but when you learn to swim, did you learn to do it by reading a manual? Probably not. No. You don't hand a 7-year-old a 40-page document on buoyancy and stroke technique and then push them in, do you? No. They get in the water, they splash, they panic a bit. Instructor holds them up till they find kind of what they're doing. And then gradually, through repetition and practice, in the real conditions, i.e. in the water, they actually learn it. Again, with driving, nobody learns to drive by watching a PowerPoint. You learn to drive by sitting in a car, stalling it repeatedly, nearly hitting a bollard in Tesco car park, and then having someone next to you saying mirror signal manoeuvre on repeat until it becomes automatic. And then eventually, you don't need to think about checking your mirrors anymore, you just do it. The behaviour then runs without instruction. So that is what we call instinct, and instinct is exactly what we should be training for. Not knowledge, not awareness, but instinct, because that's what holds up under pressure, when you're distracted, when you're tired, when you're hungover, when your kids are annoying you. That's what holds up, because it's been rehearsed so many times that it doesn't need conscious thought. It works for everything, so I don't know why we all sit and think that cybersecurity is so different. Why do we think in cyber that we can hand someone a slide deck about phishing and expect their behaviour to change? It makes no sense. Here's what the evidence says actually works, and it's not mysterious, it's not magic. Luckily for you lot, it's actually engineering. Most of us are engineers in cyber. Oh, we all like to say we are. We can engineer engagement. Engagement does not happen by accident, so beneath every single experience that holds your attention, whether that's a film, a game, an investigation, an escape room like the ones that we provide, there are a set of psychological forces that pull you forward. So the book that I've written that identifies 7 different forces, but I'm going to give you the ones that I think matter the most here. So the first one is story. Humans are wired for a narrative. If you give someone a problem inside a story, their brain treats it totally differently than if you gave them the same problem delivered as a bullet point on a slide. The story is what creates the context. It creates emotional investment. It creates that feeling that what happens next actually matters. Let's be real, no one's ever leaned forward in their chair during a compliance module and gone, ooh, I wonder what's next. But if you put them inside a scenario where they get to be the hackers or they get to be the investigator or they're the last line of defence, you should completely watch what happens and see how much emotional investment people have in it. The next one is pressure. Not panic, we don't want to get people stressed out, but we do want to give them a little bit of pressure. They're giving them the sense that the outcome does matter. So if there's a ticking clock, a decision with some consequences, there's something at stake. If you remove that pressure, the moment just dissolves into trivia. But if we add it, then the brain kind of perks up and goes, ooh, this is interesting. Autonomy. So the moment that The moment that someone else kind of takes the wheel when you're driving, that's where your attention totally drifts. When you're a passenger in a car, do you remember the journey? No. When you're driving, you obviously do. Most compliance training tells people where to start, how fast to go, what to look at, and when they're allowed to leave. That's not learning, that's just sitting in traffic. Give people choices, let them navigate. The moment that they realise that their decisions influence what happens next, that's where you get the engagement. That's when curiosity replaces obligation. And the last one is fun. I know some of you might be flinching when I say this, because corporate culture has spent decades treating seriousness and fun as the exact polar opposites of each other. But they're not. There is a whole chapter in here about fun. Fun is what supplies the energy. Seriousness provides the direction that we're going in. Together, those two things create engagement that's really strong. So if people are enjoying a challenge because it's fun, they'll stick with it for longer. They'll try harder. They'll notice more things. They'll experiment. Fun isn't the seasoning on top of learning. It's the mechanism that actually makes learning stick. And when organisations dismiss fun as frivolous, they are discarding one of the most powerful cognitive tools that they have available to them. And again, numbers back all this stuff up. So KnowBe4's 2025 data, 14.5 million users, 67 million simulated phishing tests. Continuous immersive training reduces phishing susceptibility from 33% to 4%. Within 12 months, that's an 86% reduction. And if we compare that to the 1.7% from annual training, that is not a marginal improvement. That is a completely different category of outcome from a completely different category of training. So what I want to do is give you all a framework, because I don't want this talk to just make people feel bad about their current programme. I want to give people something that they can actually use, that's actually useful. The problem is in a lot of organisations is sequence. So most programmes kind of start with awareness, which is the kind of knowledge layer, and they kind of just stop there. That's it. But awareness isn't. Awareness is just literally the knowledge. So there's actually an order that we need to do things in. So first up is engagement. Engagement comes first. And we've covered this before, but remember, engagement is the price of entry. If people are not paying attention to what you're doing, what you're saying, nothing else matters. You could be telling me the state fucking secrets, right? But if you're delivering it in a really boring way and I'm not engaged with it, I'm not going to listen to any of them. Can't mandate people's attention. You've got to earn people's attention. So every compliance module that we've got, there's auto playing in a tab in the background. It's complete proof that mandating attention does not work, because people are still complying with it. They're paying no notice to it at all though. Engagement isn't just about making training fun, that does help, but it's about making it impossible to ignore. So it's creating genuine pressure, making people make real decisions, and creating moments that stick because the brain decides that they matter. Not because we decide that they matter, the brain decides that they matter. Culture comes second. So culture is what people do when nobody's watching, and I do have a podcast coming out about this in the next month, I think. Culture is what people do when no one's watching, and in most organisations what people do when no one's watching is avoid drawing attention to themselves, because the culture, whether anyone has intended it or not, has often taught people that mistakes get you in trouble, reporting feels risky, and the security team exists to catch you out rather than back you up. So think about psychological safety for a second. If someone in the organisation is going to get told off by their boss for taking an extra 30 seconds to verify a request, if someone's getting told that they're slowing down a project because they questioned an unusual email, if senior leadership are not modelling those behaviours, if they're bypassing all the controls that people have to follow, those are the things that get people feeling that asking questions makes them look paranoid, difficult, whatever, and that means that they'll stop asking questions. And silence is one of the most dangerous places for your organisation to be in. Now, on the other hand, when culture's working, the environment actually does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because reporting just feels obvious, which means that mistakes surface earlier. Good behaviour stops being exceptional and starts just being, that's just how we do things around here. Security then can become something that people own rather than something that happens to them. That's not a soft outcome. That is one of the most durable risk reductions that you can buy. And then we've got awareness. Awareness is the knowledge layer. So that's the stuff that 99% of organisations, they've nailed this one. So this one's the easy one. That's the information that we've been feeding our people. The understanding of what a phishing email looks like, knowing why you need to use a password manager, understanding not to share your credentials with other people, understanding why you should bring the security team in at the beginning of a project. That stuff is important to understand it, right? But it's not the only thing. You can't just do knowledge transfer like that. So the thing that we want to get out of it is instinct, and that is what the outcome is. This is the bit that most programs get nowhere near close to. Instinct is the behaviour that we've said that no longer requires any conscious effort. So it's not training that's recalled under pressure. It's not a mental checklist that we're running through before clicking a link. It's the making the right call made before your conscious thought has had any chance to fully catch up. Because the pattern is so embedded, it just runs. So if we think about driving again, you don't decide to check your mirrors, do you? You just do it. And it's not because you've memorised the highway code. It's because you've practiced in real conditions thousands of times until that behaviour just becomes automatic. The problem is attackers don't wait for people to be alert and ready. They engineer the exact opposite conditions. They engineer urgency, distraction, fatigue, time pressure, whatever. And our defences often crumble under those conditions because they're not instinctive. So let's just go right back to where we started. You've all driven too fast when you were running late. You all knew it was wrong, and you all did it anyway. Not because you lacked awareness, not because you're terrible people, but because the context and the pressure and the moment overrode exactly what you knew. That is what happens to your employees every single day, and you are never ever going to fix that with more information. Nobody's learnt to swim from a manual. Nobody's learnt to drive from a slide deck. And nobody, absolutely nobody, will learn to respond to a social engineering attack from a 40-minute module they completed 6 months ago. They just can't, right? So the fix for it is by designing training for the brain that people actually have. So earning their attention, not mandating it. Building a culture where the right behaviour is the easy behaviour. And by rehearsing the right responses until they become instinctive. The data on this is not ambiguous. The question is whether we're ready to design for it. And that is the end of that talk. So, hopefully that was useful. If you are interested in learning more about how we think about this stuff, about designing for the brain that people actually have, then yes, you can download the PDF, or you can buy the real version of this book, which has got 20 practical ways to introduce engagement. It's got information in there like the business case for engagement, how you can go to the grown-ups and go get a bit more cash out of them, for designing something that actually works. And no, it doesn't tell you all of the stuff that I sell. It's not a complete plug the whole way through. It is hopefully useful information that explains a little bit more around this kind of philosophy. So thank you all for joining, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one.